The concert hall was silent, so silent that even the clicking of a distant camera shutter echoed like a thunderclap. Thousands of eyes stared at the small figure standing beside the grand Steinway piano. He was no more than 10, dressed in a suit that didn't quite fit, with dark sunglasses masking eyes that had never seen light. The famous pianist Gregory Langston, known for his arrogance and unmatched skill, looked down at the boy with a faint smirk and gestured casually toward the keys. "Go ahead," he said, his voice tinged with amusement. "Play something, just for fun." A quiet chuckle rippled through the audience, half curiosity, half disbelief. The boy said nothing. He simply placed his thin fingers on the keys like he was greeting an old friend. For a second, nothing happened. Then, without warning, the air shifted. The first note rang out, pure and haunting. It wasn't a beginner's fumbling tune. It wasn't something memorized. It was soul. It was pain. It was love and grief and joy, all wrapped into melody. The auditorium froze, as if time itself held its breath. Gregory Langston's smile faded. His eyes narrowed, focused. The notes cascaded from the piano like waterfalls, delicate, then furious, then heartbreaking. Every key the boy touched told a story, as if his fingers were translating emotions straight from heaven. People in the front row leaned forward, jaws slack. One woman gasped. A man reached for his chest. Tears began falling. Quiet, reverent. 3 minutes in, the audience had forgotten who they came to see. They forgot the fame, the cameras, the world outside. There was only this boy, this blind boy, playing not with sight, but with something deeper, something divine. And then he stopped. He slowly lifted his hands off the keys, and silence filled the space again, not the silence of waiting, but the silence of awe. Nobody clapped at first. They couldn't. Their hands wouldn't move. Their breath wouldn't return. Gregory Langston stood frozen, unable to speak. How did this child, this unknown, blind boy, play with such power, such perfection? What the world didn't know yet was that this wasn't a lucky moment. It wasn't a trick. This was the beginning of something no one could explain, a miracle born of darkness and sound. He was born into a silence far deeper than most could understand, not because he couldn't hear, but because the world never expected him to speak through music. His name was Elijah. From the moment he came into the world, doctors shook their heads in quiet pity. Retinal dysplasia. No light, no shapes, nothing. His mother, Patrice, held him tight in that cold hospital room and whispered through tears, "You'll never see the world, baby, but I promise I'll show it to you." They lived in the south side of Chicago, in a one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint, leaky windows, and dreams too big to fit in such small spaces. Patrice worked nights at a nursing home, folding bedsheets and emptying trash cans just to put food on the table. She never complained. Her son was her world. But the world didn't return the love. At school, Elijah didn't fit in. The other kids teased him when they thought he couldn't hear them. Look at the blind bat, they'd whisper. What's he even doing here? Teachers, overwhelmed and undertrained, mostly ignored him. They handed him audiobooks and called it education. He spent most of his days in silence, sitting alone at recess, tracing his fingers across his desk, pretending he was playing something that only he could hear. But he never complained either. Not once. Because where others saw darkness, Elijah heard music. It began with the sounds outside their apartment. Raindrops hitting the metal trash can. Sirens in the distance, harmonizing with the barking dogs. Even the squeak of his mother's shoes on the kitchen floor at 5 a.m. had a rhythm to it. To Elijah, every sound told a story. While most people saw life in colors, he was painting his world in melody. One day, when he was 6, Patrice walked into the living room and found him sitting upright on the couch, motionless. She panicked, thinking something had happened, but when she moved closer, she realized he was listening. Deeply, fully. His head tilted, his ear turned toward the open window. A broken ice cream truck was passing by, its speaker skipping and warbling through an off-key version of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Elijah whispered, almost reverently, "It's not broken, it's sad." Patrice froze. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. Like he could feel the music's pain. Like he could understand something no one else could. But they didn't have a piano. No instruments. Not even a keyboard toy. All Elijah had were the sounds in his head and the dreams in his heart. Still, every night after dinner, he would sit on the carpet and tap rhythms into the floorboards. With spoons, with pencils, with his fingers. His mother would sometimes watch from the doorway and cry silently, not from sadness, but from something deeper, wonder mixed with fear. She knew there was something extraordinary in her son. She just didn't know how the world would treat it, because in their world, black boys with disabilities weren't praised. They weren't given stages. They were ignored, forgotten, or worse, reduced to pity. But Elijah wasn't built to be pitied. He was being shaped, quietly in the shadows, for something bigger. Something the world couldn't predict, something that couldn't be taught. And it all started in a home where there was no piano, only a child who played the world by ear. In a world without sight, sound became Elijah's sanctuary. While most children ran through fields chasing sunlight or played games on screens, Elijah sat cross-legged by his bedroom window, tuning into the frequencies of life. It was there, just beneath the ordinary noise, that he found his joy. Every creak of the floor, every honk in traffic, every distant church bell felt like a hidden message meant just for him. He would tilt his head like a bird, soaking in the layers, footsteps from upstairs, a faucet dripping in the hallway, a moth brushing softly against the curtain. It was all music, raw, chaotic, beautiful music. Patrice often watched in quiet awe as her son would hum strange melodies no one taught him. At first, she thought he was mimicking TV jingles or songs from the radio, but soon she realized he was creating, improvising, composing. His mind wasn't just absorbing sound. It was translating it into something new, something unexplainable. One afternoon, as Patrice folded laundry, Elijah sat on the floor with two forks in hand, tapping them gently against a metal bowl. She listened. Tap, 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 tap. Pause. Tap, 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 tap. It wasn't random. It had structure, emotion. It sounded almost like a heartbeat, then like a lullaby. He wasn't making noise. He was building a song. Elijah, she asked softly, "What are you playing?" He paused, thought for a moment, then smiled. "It's what the wind sounds like when it's lonely." Patrice dropped the shirt she was folding. Her chest tightened. In that moment, she realized something that terrified and amazed her all at once. Her son wasn't just different. He was gifted, but a gift without a path could just as easily be a burden. She knew he needed more than a metal bowl and wooden spoons. He needed a piano, a real one, but they couldn't afford it. Rent was overdue. Food was rationed. His talent, like everything else in their life, had to wait. Still, Elijah didn't complain. He continued building entire orchestras in his imagination. His fingers would move across the air like he was conducting invisible musicians. He began to remember patterns, assigning colors and feelings to chords he couldn't name. Sometimes he would ask, "Mom, what does blue feel like?" And she would answer with a smile, "It feels like Sunday mornings." He would nod and hum something soft and slow. That was blue, then. To Elijah, emotion and sound were inseparable. Sadness was a low hum. Joy was a quick tap and a high whistle. Anger was offbeat and sharp. He began to feel people's moods through their footsteps, their voices, even the way they shut a door. Every sound told a truth. And music became the only language he truly trusted. At school, he still sat alone. But in his mind, he was never lonely. He had entire symphonies to keep him company. His classmates saw a blind, quiet boy in the back corner of the room. What they didn't see was the orchestra unfolding behind his smile, an invisible world of rhythm and resonance. And though he didn't yet know how, Elijah was starting to believe something inside him wasn't just hearing the world, it was interpreting it. It was music, and it belonged to him. It happened by accident. Patrice had picked up an extra Sunday shift at the nursing home. She hated leaving Elijah alone for long, but they needed the money, and he had grown used to entertaining himself in the quiet sanctuary of their apartment. That day, however, their upstairs neighbor, Miss Laverne, an elderly woman with a bad hip and a soft heart, offered to take Elijah to her church. There was a community lunch, and she figured a few hours in a warm place with kind people couldn't hurt. The church was old, its wood creaking with every step and the scent of lemon polish lingering in the air. Elijah didn't know much about religion, but he loved the sound of gospel music. It made his chest feel wide and open, like the sun was somehow touching him from the inside. As he sat in the pew beside Miss Laverne, he swayed gently to the hums of the choir warming up. Their harmonies painted pictures he could feel in his bones: gold, fire, water, joy. After the service and a plate of baked macaroni, Elijah wandered toward the front of the sanctuary. The place was mostly empty now, but something was calling to him, a subtle vibration, a sense, a whisper through space. And then he felt it. A piano. It sat off to the side, covered in a thin layer of dust, its bench slightly crooked. He reached out slowly, as if touching something sacred. His fingers landed on the wood. Cold. Smooth. Then the keys, ivory, uneven from years of use. He didn't ask permission. He didn't need to. His hands moved instinctively. The first note rang out, soft and hesitant. He paused, then another, and another. It wasn't perfect. Some keys were out of tune, and his fingers trembled at first. But within moments, the sound began to bloom. He played a pattern he'd tapped into the floor at home. Then he layered it with a rhythm he'd once heard from a train track. His left hand followed, adding weight. His body began to sway, not to the music, but with it. Unknown to Elijah, two people had stopped at the back of the sanctuary. Miss Laverne and the church's janitor stood frozen, their mouths slightly open. The boy wasn't playing a hymn. He wasn't playing anything they recognized, but it was transcendent, like hearing emotion made real. Patrice arrived shortly after, breathless and worried, having rushed straight from work. She spotted him from the back, small and fragile, seated at a piano too large for his frame, his fingers dancing like they were chasing light. She didn't interrupt. She couldn't. She stood there, tears lining her tired eyes, overwhelmed by something she'd always known deep down but could never prove until now. Her son was different. He wasn't just talented. He was extraordinary. When he finally stopped playing, Elijah turned his head toward the sound of footsteps. "Did I get in trouble?" he asked softly. Miss Laverne chuckled, wiping her face. "No, baby," she whispered. "You just gave this church the most beautiful thing it's heard in years." Patrice walked up, knelt beside him, and placed her hand on his back. He smiled. "Mom," he said, "that piano, it talked back to me." And for the first time, the gift Elijah had only imagined became real. The piano wasn't just an instrument. It was an extension of himself, a voice the world could finally hear. Word spreads fast in small places. By the following Sunday, the old church sanctuary wasn't just filled, it was overflowing. People who hadn't set foot in the building in years came with curious whispers. "The blind boy who plays like an angel," they said. Some were skeptical, assuming it was church gossip stretched too far. Others just wanted to see something unusual. But Patrice knew better. She sat on the front row, her hands clasped tightly, heart thudding louder than any hymn. Elijah didn't seem nervous. He sat still on the bench, fingers resting on his lap, listening to the murmurs, the creak of the pews, the coughs, the shuffling shoes. He soaked it all in. The music was already forming in his mind before a single note was played. Then, with a deep breath, he placed his fingers on the keys. He didn't begin with a familiar gospel song or something safe and rehearsed. Instead, he created, right there, in real time. The notes were soft at first, like water dripping on a quiet rooftop. Then they rose, bold and sharp, like a question demanding an answer. The melody weaved through the air, touching places no sermon could reach. No sheet music, no lessons, just soul. Some people gasped, others leaned forward, frowning, not in confusion, but in disbelief. A few closed their eyes, their breathing slowing, tears beginning fall. The sound he created was so human it hurt, aching with truth, yet full of grace. It was as if Elijah had opened a door no one else knew existed. And when he finished, silence hung like a sacred mist. Then came the applause, thunderous, rising from every corner of the sanctuary, people on their feet, clapping, shouting hallelujah and amen. Some rushed to the front to hug him. Others stood frozen, hands over their hearts. Elijah simply tilted his head and smiled. He didn't need to see their faces. He felt the warmth in their claps. He heard the tears in their voices. The music had reached them, and that was enough. After the service, church elders approached Patrice. Sister Patrice, one said, shaking his head slowly, "God gave your boy something mighty special." She smiled, but behind her eyes was worry. Because with attention comes pressure. With praise, expectation. She had seen too many black boys praised for what made them different, then crushed by a world that only celebrated them until it felt threatened. Outside, Elijah stood in the sun, tilting his face toward the sky. A little girl walked up and placed a flower in his hand. "Your music made my grandma cry," she said softly. Elijah didn't quite know how to respond. He just whispered, "Sometimes I cry too, but only inside the music." From that day forward, he was no longer just Elijah, the blind boy who hummed strange songs in silence. He was now Elijah, the child prodigy with the soul of a maestro. Invitations to other churches trickled in. Small community events started asking if he could bless them with a song. People were moved, changed, inspired, but not everyone celebrated. There were whispers, doubt from those who couldn't believe a boy who had never read music could create it so flawlessly. Jealous musicians, skeptical teachers, and somewhere in the background, the world of professionals watching, waiting. Still, Elijah kept playing. Not for fame, not for praise. He played because the music inside him wouldn't stop. Gregory Langston didn't believe in miracles. He believed in practice, theory, and legacy, his legacy. He was a household name among the classical elite, a child prodigy turned world-class pianist known for his unmatched technique and unapologetic arrogance. His concerts sold out in minutes. His students fought for a place in his overpriced masterclasses. And his critics? He welcomed them. As far as Gregory was concerned, no one on earth could touch a piano the way he did. So, when his agent emailed him a link to a video titled "Blind Black Boy Brings Church to Tears," Gregory didn't even open it. He scoffed. Viral videos were a dime a dozen. Talent, real talent, didn't need shaky iPhone footage and emotional hashtags. But the buzz wouldn't stop. That same clip reached over 2 million views in a week. People weren't just watching, they were weeping, reposting, comparing the boy to Mozart. Some even said he had the touch of God. Gregory rolled his eyes. "Blasphemous nonsense," he muttered. Still, curiosity eventually won. Late one night, with a glass of scotch in hand and a bored heart, Gregory clicked the link. The boy couldn't have been more than 10. Skinny, fragile, blind. And yet, within 15 seconds, Gregory's smug expression faded. He leaned forward. The boy's hands moved with a confidence and freedom that defied formality, but the emotion was pure. The transitions, the pacing, the phrasing, untrained, yes, but unmistakably genius. Gregory didn't finish his scotch. He just stared at the screen long after the video ended, trying to convince himself that what he'd just seen was an accident. A week later, he found himself at a Chicago charity event where the boy was scheduled to perform. The organizers hadn't mentioned Elijah directly. They only said, "We've invited a local prodigy. We think you'll be impressed." Gregory had scoffed, but showed up anyway, expecting to be bored and flattered in equal measure. Backstage, Elijah stood beside a dusty upright piano in the corner of the event hall, unaware of the storm he was about to walk into. He wasn't dressed like a star, just a clean white shirt, faded jeans, and his ever-present sunglasses. While other performers paced nervously or chatted in cliques, Elijah stood still, listening, absorbing the sounds around him like threads for a tapestry only he could weave. Gregory spotted him and approached slowly. "You're the boy everyone's whispering about," he said flatly. Elijah turned toward the voice, nodding slightly. Yes, sir. Gregory tilted his head. Can you actually play? Or do people just like the way you look? Patrice, standing nearby, stiffened. Elijah didn't. He smiled faintly. I can play, sir, he said, but I don't do it for people. I do it because I have to. That answer irritated Gregory and intrigued him. When Elijah was introduced on stage, a polite applause followed. Most of the crowd didn't know him. Some were there for the food, others came for Langston. But Gregory sat front row, arms crossed, eyes sharp. As Elijah sat at the grand piano, he hesitated for just a breath. Then he turned his face toward the crowd and asked softly, "Would you like something happy or something honest?" A chuckle rippled through the room. Someone shouted, "Play whatever you feel, baby." Gregory leaned back, unimpressed. "Just play something," he muttered under his breath. "Just for fun." Elijah began, and what followed was nothing short of divine rebellion. He played a piece no one had ever heard. It had no name, no composer. It was wild and disciplined, simple and complex, aching and hopeful. Gregory's eyes widened. He leaned forward, then froze. The phrasing, the modulation, the breath between chords. It was genius, unpolished genius. Yes, but genius nonetheless. And for the first time in years, Gregory Langston felt something strange in his chest. Jealousy, fear, wonder. As the final note faded, the room erupted. Gregory didn't clap. He couldn't. His hands trembled slightly, and he hated that. Elijah stood, bowed slightly toward the sound of the crowd, and walked off stage. As he passed Gregory's chair, the boy paused and said quietly, "Did you hear it? Or were you just listening?" Gregory had no answer. The performance changed everything. By the time Elijah and Patrice got home that night, clips from the event were already circulating online. A local journalist had filmed the entire performance and posted it with the caption, "Blind Boy Shocks Legendary Pianist. A Star is Born." Within hours, the video had reached 100,000 views. By morning, it was in the millions. Headlines flooded social media. He played, with his soul, not his eyes. 10-year-old blind pianist leaves Gregory Langston speechless. Musical messiah or media myth? Talk shows picked it up. News anchors recited his quotes like poetry. Music forums buzzed with debates. Half the world was falling in love with Elijah's story, calling him the voice of God. The other half was suspicious, cynical, loud. Some accused the video of being staged. Others claimed it was overdubbed or that the boy was mimicking memorized pieces like a parrot. "He's just lucky," a bitter online critic wrote. "He can't even read music." "He'll burn out like the rest," said another. The internet was cruel and worshipful, all at once. Patrice tried to shield Elijah from it, but the world was knocking too loud to ignore. Reporters began calling the apartment. A television crew showed up at their door. There were offers, some generous, others exploitative. Recording contracts, interview requests, reality shows. Everyone wanted a piece of the miracle. But Elijah didn't care for the noise. He spent most of his time with his headphones on, listening to recordings of jazz and soul, gospel and classical, piecing together what the world sounded like when it wasn't screaming. He continued to play, but now with something new lingering behind each note, pressure. At school, things shifted. The same classmates who once ignored him now hovered near his desk. Some asked for autographs. Others asked if he could play something cool. Teachers watched him differently, some in awe, others with skepticism. And still, a few couldn't hide their resentment. "He's not special," one whispered in the lounge. "He's just a blind kid who got lucky with a viral video." The local school board invited Patrice in for a meeting. One of the officials suggested Elijah be transferred to a gifted program, not for the blind, but for prodigies. Patrice hesitated. The program had resources and private tutors, yes, but also a reputation for pressure and burnout. Still, she knew opportunity didn't knock twice where they lived. Meanwhile, Gregory Langston remained publicly silent. He didn't mention Elijah in interviews, didn't comment on the video, but privately he watched it over and over. At night, alone, he played the same piece Elijah had performed, trying to feel what the boy had expressed. He couldn't replicate it. The technique, yes, but not the emotion. Gregory began to wonder, was it possible this boy played not from knowledge, but from something deeper, some other sense no one else possessed? A month later, an unexpected invitation arrived: the American Music Honors Gala, an annual televised event watched by millions. And this year, they wanted Elijah, not in the audience, not as a guest. They wanted him to perform as the opening act. Gregory Langston, headlining that very show, was the one who strongly recommended it. Patrice stared at the email for minutes, breath caught in her throat. She turned to Elijah. "Do you want to do it?" she asked, worried. "It's a big stage. A lot of people." Elijah simply smiled. "Will the piano be tuned?" She laughed, tears in her eyes. "Yes, baby. It'll be perfect." He nodded. "Then I'll play." Fame, they say, is a spotlight. But for Elijah, it was more like a magnifying glass, and the heat was starting to burn. The announcement of his performance at the American Music Honors Gala sparked headlines across the country. Major news outlets called it historic. Music blogs hailed him as a prodigy who would rewrite the rules of classical performance. But with every article of praise came another filled with doubt, envy, and suspicion. Commentators on television questioned the decision. Why give the opening act to a child with no formal training? This is emotional bait, not artistic excellence. Can he even read music? Or are we just impressed because he's blind? Gregory Langston, for all his silence, had unintentionally fueled the fire by not defending Elijah publicly. His lack of endorsement was taken by many as passive disapproval. Forums filled with toxic speculation. Anonymous musicians claimed it was impossible for a child to have such skill without ghost training. Others suggested Patrice was manipulating the public for sympathy and fame. Patrice tried to ignore it, but the whispers crept in like mold, growing in the corners of her mind. What if the world wasn't ready to accept a child like Elijah? What if this opportunity was a curse disguised as a miracle? And Elijah, he felt it too. He no longer played freely. The melodies he once discovered with joy now felt like assignments. Every time he touched a key, he wondered who would criticize the sound. He began to ask questions he had never asked before. Was that too simple? Was that what people expected? Was it good enough for them? One night, Patrice found him sitting in the dark living room, fingers motionless on his lap. The piano sat untouched. "You okay, baby?" she asked gently. He didn't answer right away. "I don't know if the music is mine anymore," he finally said. "It used to be just me and the sounds. Now it feels like everyone's watching, waiting for me to mess up." Patrice's heart broke. She sat beside him, wrapping her arms around his small shoulders. "They don't get to take your music from you, Elijah. That piano doesn't belong to the world. It belongs to you. The world's just lucky you let them listen." He stayed quiet, then whispered, "But what if they're right? What if I'm just a blind boy they feel sorry for?" Patrice turned his face gently toward hers. "No, baby. They're not listening because you're blind. They're listening because you see things they never could. You don't play from memory. You play from soul. And that's something they'll never be able to fake." Still, the doubt lingered. Even his dreams became quieter. The notes he once heard in his sleep were now muffled, like trying to play underwater. Every interview, every photo shoot, every new article added weight to his small frame. Until one day, a package arrived. Inside was a single envelope. No return address. No explanation. It was a letter, handwritten, from Gregory Langston. "You made me remember why I started playing. You don't need to prove anything. Just play. No signature. No compliments. Just truth." Elijah held the letter in his hands for a long time, and for the first time in weeks, he smiled. Then he sat down at the piano, and he played, not for the critics, not for the crowd, not for the cameras, but for the silence that raised him, for the wind that once whispered lullabies, for himself. After the gala invitation, Elijah's name stopped being a whisper and became a national conversation. Everyone wanted to know who was behind the boy with no sight and too much soul. The pressure to prove himself mounted. Record labels suggested formal training. Magazine articles speculated whether he could survive under the discipline of classical conservatories. A prestigious arts foundation even offered to sponsor him on the condition that he agree to formal musical education. But Elijah didn't resist the idea. He wasn't afraid of training. He was hungry for it, if it helped him grow, not confine. When Patrice asked if he was ready to learn from others, he simply nodded and said, "As long as I don't have to unlearn myself." Gregory Langston, surprisingly, stepped in. Silently, privately, he invited Elijah and Patrice to his studio. No press, no cameras, just music. He offered to mentor him, not as a charity case or media stunt, but as an artist who saw something he couldn't explain. The first session was quiet. Elijah sat at the Steinway while Gregory stood nearby, watching. "Play something," he said. "Anything." Elijah did, but this time, Gregory interrupted. "Stop. Try it like this." He played a phrase elegant and flawless. Elijah listened, then repeated it note for note, but added a small flourish at the end. Gregory frowned. "That wasn't exactly what I played." "I know," Elijah replied gently. "It's what it wanted to become." Gregory didn't correct him. He simply said, again. Days turned to weeks. They worked through structure, harmony, composer's history. Elijah learned fast, but not traditionally. He didn't read sheet music. He remembered shapes in sound, emotion in patterns. He memorized entire sonatas in hours. He could mimic styles after one listen. But more than that, he transformed them. Gregory, a man who once lived for precision, found himself humbled. "This boy's not imitating," he told a friend. "He's translating something the rest of us can hear." It wasn't long before scientists took notice. A neuroscientist from NYU requested permission to observe Elijah's brain while he listened and played. With Patrice's blessing, they agreed. The results were astounding. While most musicians used isolated parts of their brain during music recall or execution, Elijah's brain lit up like a constellation: memory centers, emotion centers, tactile mapping, and something else. A strange, consistent activity pattern scientists couldn't define. Almost as if his brain was feeling the music in dimensions that had no name. "He hears differently," the doctor explained. "He processes music like it's emotion, touch, and memory all at once. It's not just talent. It's neurological poetry." When Elijah was told this, he tilted his head and smiled. "I told you," he said softly, "I don't play what I hear. I play what I feel." The media went wild again, but this time it was different. The conversation shifted from spectacle to science, from curiosity to reverence. He wasn't a novelty. He was a phenomenon, and all the doubt that once weighed down his shoulders began to lift, not because he was finally believed, but because he no longer needed anyone's permission to be who he already was. Gregory, watching from behind the scenes, told Patrice one evening, "He's beyond me now. I came here thinking I'd teach him, but he's taught me how to listen again." As the day of the gala drew closer, Elijah practiced, but not out of fear. This time, he played with a sense of calm, not to impress, not approve, but to tell a truth that had lived in silence too long. Because now, the world was finally ready to hear it. The night of the American Music Honors Gala arrived, and with it came a storm of expectation. The red carpet outside was a flash of lights, glittering gowns, and paparazzi chaos. Inside, the air buzzed with celebrity chatter, industry politics, and high-stakes performances. The best of the best were in attendance: multi-platinum artists, legendary composers, and of course, Gregory Langston, the closing act of the night. But it wasn't Gregory who had people whispering. It was the boy, the blind boy, the boy with no formal training. The boy who played like the universe had chosen him. Backstage, Elijah sat still in a quiet corner, headphones over his ears, rocking gently. He wasn't listening to music, just the ambient sounds of the room. The footsteps, the creak of the stage boards, the click of a makeup brush against a table. Each sound grounded him. Each one helped him remember why he was here. Patrice knelt in front of him, adjusting his collar with trembling hands. "You ready?" she asked, her voice barely holding together. Elijah nodded. "I'm not nervous," he said. "I just want to be honest." She kissed his forehead. "That's all you ever needed to be." The stage manager approached, clipboard in hand. 2 minutes. Patrice stepped back. Gregory Langston walked by, pausing just for a moment. He didn't speak, just placed a firm hand on Elijah's shoulder, then walked on. The curtains parted. The announcer's voice boomed. "Please welcome to the stage 10-year-old Elijah Brooks." A spotlight swept across the massive stage as Elijah was led gently to the piano bench. The audience applauded politely at first. Some stood to get a better look. Others raised their phones. But the room quieted fast, curious, skeptical, unsure of what to expect. Elijah took a deep breath, placed his fingers on the keys, and began. The first notes were delicate, barely there, like breath on glass. Then, slowly, they deepened, building into a layered, haunting melody that pulled the air from the room. This wasn't Bach. This wasn't Chopin. This was Elijah, original, unscripted, intimate. He played like a storyteller, each note a memory, each pause a breath. The music rose and fell like ocean waves, raging, then calming, then rising again. At times, the melody sounded like laughter. At others, like someone quietly weeping in the dark. Halfway through, the left hand introduced a heartbeat rhythm, soft and steady, while the right hand painted grief and grace above it. The cameras didn't matter. The critics didn't exist. There was only the sound. And as Elijah played, tears welled in the eyes of hardened music executives and stone-faced producers. Celebrities known for their glamour sat frozen in vulnerability. The pianist who had conquered concert halls across the globe, Gregory Langston, leaned forward in his chair, jaw tight, heart breaking, because Elijah wasn't just performing music. He was translating the human experience. Everything he'd lived, poverty, loneliness, curiosity, doubt, wonder, it all poured out in sound. His blindness wasn't a limitation. It was a lens, a purity, a path that had led him to this very moment where he gave the world something it didn't know it had lost, feeling, and when the final note fell, soft and whole, it echoed through the silence like a prayer. Elijah lifted his hands and let them fall into his lap. Silence. Then a wave of applause exploded across the room. But not the kind of applause you hear at typical award shows. This was deeper, louder. People were on their feet, sobbing, cheering, reaching for something they couldn't quite name. Gregory stood slowly, then clapped, once, twice, and kept going. Soon, the entire audience was standing with him. A full standing ovation. For a blind boy who didn't follow the rules, who couldn't read the music, who didn't ask for approval. He simply told the truth. Backstage, Patrice cried like she hadn't in years, not from fear, not from sadness, but from awe, gratitude, relief. Her son had found his voice in a world that had tried to silence him. Later that night, as they rode home in a quiet car, Elijah leaned his head against the window. "Mom," he whispered. "Yes, baby. I think the music was always inside me. I just finally let it all out." Patrice smiled through her tears. "And the whole world heard you." The days after the gala were a whirlwind. The video of Elijah's performance topped 100 million views in under a week. News anchors called it the most powerful live moment of the decade. International composers sent messages of admiration. Music conservatories from around the globe extended full scholarships. And yet, through all the noise, Elijah remained grounded, still waking up to the sound of birds outside his window, still listening for rhythm in the rain tapping against his windowsill. He had become a symbol, not of blindness, not of disability, but of pure, unfiltered, unteachable genius. And more importantly, of honesty in a world obsessed with perfection. But Elijah didn't want to become just another celebrity. When Patrice asked him what he wanted now that the world had opened its arms to him, he said simply, "I want other kids like me to know they don't have to be fixed. They just have to be heard." So that's what he did. Instead of signing exclusive record deals or going on global tours, Elijah and Patrice founded the Listening Room, a nonprofit organization that provided musical instruments and creative therapy to visually impaired and underserved children across the country. It wasn't about creating the next prodigy, it was about unlocking what had always been hidden, potential waiting in silence. Gregory Langston, who had once measured greatness in technique, became a quiet but consistent supporter. He visited schools, hosted free masterclasses, and told every student he met, "You don't have to see the notes. You just have to feel the truth behind them." Elijah kept composing, not for charts or radio, but for people, songs for children battling cancer, for lonely elders in nursing homes, for mothers grieving loss. His music found its way into film scores, healing centers, and even space. When NASA asked to include one of his original piano pieces in a time capsule to be launched beyond Earth. Years passed, but Elijah never stopped being Elijah. When asked during an interview what the proudest moment of his life was, he didn't mention the gala. He didn't mention awards, TV specials, or standing ovations. He said, "It was the first time I touched a piano, and it talked back to me." That moment, he explained, reminded him that the world was always speaking. You just had to listen deeply enough to hear what others missed. And so, Elijah's legacy wasn't just his music. It was his quiet defiance of expectation, his ability to transform pain into melody, his reminder to the world that talent isn't always found in institutions, that truth doesn't come from certificates or applause. It comes from somewhere deeper, beneath the noise, beyond the spotlight. It comes from the soul. And in every room he entered, every life he touched, every key he pressed, Elijah taught us one simple, powerful truth. You don't need sight to see beauty. You don't need fame to make history. You just need the courage to play what only you can feel. What if the person the world overlooks is the one who holds the most extraordinary gift? What if greatness doesn't look like fame, perfection, or privilege, but instead sounds like a quiet song played in the dark by someone who was never supposed to be heard? Elijah Brooks didn't ask to become a legend. He never chased applause, and he never needed the world's permission to be brilliant. He simply listened to what was always inside him. And when he finally let it out, the world stopped to listen. In a time where everything is filtered, staged, and polished, Elijah reminded us of something real. That talent isn't always trained. That soul can't be taught. That sometimes the most powerful music comes from silence, and the most powerful people are the ones no one saw coming. So ask yourself, how many Elijahs are out there? Children with voices unheard, with visions unseen, with gifts the world hasn't bothered to unwrap? How many times have we judged someone by what they lack, instead of seeing what they carry within? Elijah's story isn't just about music. It's about what happens when someone dares to play the truth unapologetically, imperfectly, and beautifully.